I personally think it's very fitting that after lunch, our next panel is about the importance of family farmers. There are more than 500 million family farmers around the world, producing at least 57% of the world's food. But they're not just food producers. They're businesswomen, entrepreneurs, innovators, and in the case of our keynote speaker, teachers and stewards of the land. I'm really, really honored and excited to introduce Brian Hallwile, who is a longtime friend, colleague, and mentor. In addition to being a member of the Food Tank Board of Directors, Brian is the editor-in-chief of Edible Brooklyn, Edible East End, Edible Long Island, and Edible Manhattan magazines. He's also the author of the book Eat Here, Homegrown Pleasures in a Global Supermarket. Jane Black is the moderator for this panel. She's an award-winning food writer who covers food politics, trends, and sustainability issues. Her work appears in the Washington Post, where she was a staff writer, and she is currently at work on a book about a town in West Virginia's struggle to change the way it eats. Please join me in welcoming Brian to the stage, who will be followed by Jane and our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you. It's truly a pleasure to be here today because I knew Danielle Nuremberg before she was the Danielle Nuremberg. We were colleagues way back when at the Rodale Institute just up the street from here, and it's an honor to see the powerful community that she has built in this room and worldwide in just the 2 short years that the Food Tank has existed. Thank you, Danielle and the Food Tank, for building this platform for our movement. So now the subject is resilience. Let's define resilience as the ability to avoid, tolerate, and recover from breakdown. Resilience is one quality that our food system is sorely lacking. Of all the reasons we need to fix our food system, that it sickens us, it impoverishes our rural communities, it separates us from our food, depletes our soil and water resources, we cannot forget that it also leaves us vulnerable and fragile, not just ecologically fragile, but economically and biologically. We glimpse this lack of resilience everywhere we look in the food chain. The number of food recalls and the scale of those recalls has increased in every year that the FDA has been tracking the data. Average corn yield in the United States, the world's largest producer of corn, has become more erratic in recent years as American farms use pretty much the same variety, the same growing techniques, and just a few big buyers. If you look at the graph, it's outrageous because it's trending up, but now it's doing this, jerking up and down. The price of our extreme productivity and technological advance has been loss of resilience. Consider the foot and mouth outbreak in the United Kingdom way back in 2001. Still a great example as bioterrorism and agroterrorism are on our minds. Compared to the more localized 1967 outbreak of foot and mouth, the 2001 outbreak instantly went nationwide, causing lots more chaos, costing billions of dollars. The epidemic of 2001 spread much farther and much faster than the earlier outbreak when meat was still butchered and sold and consumed locally. Today, instead of the complicated, dense web of local connections in the British meat chain, there are now just a few isolated arteries and bottlenecks and hubs that are much more vulnerable to any sort of breakdown. Resilience is founded on diversity and adaptability and redundancy, multiple connections rather than just a few links, and resilience can come back fast. It can spread throughout the food chain. It can feed on itself. So what will it take to build back resilience in this country and beyond? Well, first, because the scale of breakdown has grown, we need to build back the resilience at scale. Think about how Organic Valley has created regional supply chains and region-specific packaging for its dairy products, or how the salad and juice chain Sweetgreen has done the same. These companies can touch millions of consumers and buy from thousands of farmers with one fell swoop. We heard earlier today about how to build farming and food production into our cities, how to cut food loss and food waste, how to give women farmers the same tools as men. All these changes will free up resources that will make our food system more resilient. It will give us more slack to deal with. Or how about the digital technology that is starting to infiltrate every link in our food chain, from dining apps like OpenTable, which have become nearly ubiquitous, to services like Amazon Fresh and Fresh Direct, or farm management platforms like Hack Farm and FarmLog. We should judge food tech not just on its sustainability, but also its ability to make us more resilient. We should judge it on its ability to make us more resilient, not just on its return on investment. Consider inventory management platforms for restaurants like Sorcery and Farmer's Web and Resi. Because they use predictive ordering technology, they help restaurants smooth out the highs and lows in their expenses, making them more resilient to shifts. And this also helps the farmers they buy from. These technologies also make it easier for restaurants to buy from a wide range of suppliers, further strengthening the food chain. Or an example that is endlessly controversial, Monsanto, which now owns the world's weather data through its acquisition of Climate Corporation earlier this year, could actually be a major player in helping farmers hedge against erratic weather, predict disease incidents, and cope with the ups and downs of crop yields. Yes, I did say Monsanto. Companies like Hampton Creek, famous for attracting the ire of Unilever, is using machine learning to build recipes for mayonnaise and cookie dough and other household products using forgotten plant species like millet and yellow peas and sorghum, using technology to build diversity into its recipes, to build resilience into our supply chain. If it's harnessed properly, food and ag tech has big potential. I'm excited to announce that we'll be doing a lot more writing and research on this at Edible, and the best way to stay updated is to follow me at Brian Hallwile and at Edible Manhattan for updates. But these are just technologies. These are just Band-Aids that allow us to cope. They don't fundamentally change how we farm or how we eat, and that is the hard work we need to do, and then that is the hard work that we're going to hear about from this panel. Thank you.
Okay, well, welcome everybody. I am Jane Black. I'm a journalist. I write about sustainable agriculture and healthy eating and small farms and everything that people in this room are probably interested. So as you can imagine, I have a pretty fun and interesting job. I have a really great group of people here. We're going to talk about resilience and family farms. I'm going to just do super quick introductions of everyone so we can get the conversation going. And make sure that we have time at the end for questions. So we're going to save 15 minutes at the end, so please, write them down and have them saved. We're going to definitely leave plenty of time for that. When I wrote down everybody's bios, it wasn't in the order they're sitting in, so bear with me here for 1 second. So to my left, to your right, is Coach Smallwood, who is the executive director of the Rodale Institute. He's focused his efforts on training a new generation of organic farmers and expanding research at Rodale Institute to explore the connection between soil and food and health. Next, we have Bernie Price, who's the co-founder and co-executive director of Fresh Farm Markets in Washington. And anybody who lives here, that needs absolutely no introduction because they're would be a sadder place without Fresh Farm Markets. But she's also responsible for creating the SNAP and Matching Dollars programs at Fresh Farm Markets that let lower income residents shop at the markets. Then we have Tom, and pronounce your last name for me?
Pasek.
Pasek, just like it looks, okay. Is the representative for the International Fund for Agricultural Development. He's based in DC, and he works to influence the direction and content of national and international poverty reduction policies and processes. And I think that's going to be really an interesting global perspective as we talk about small farms and the importance of them. Then we have Chandler Gould, who's the National Farmers Union Senior Vice President of Programs, and he oversees government relations, communications, membership, and education, which advocate for the economic and social well-being of family farmers, ranchers, fishermen, and consumers. Sorry about that. Something just fell on our heads over here. That was interesting. Okay, so next up we have Kathy Ozer. And Kathy, tell me your title.
I'm the
Executive Director, okay, of the National Family Farm Coalition. Very involved in advocating for small farm, family farms, sustainable farms needs both in Washington and around the country. And finally, Eric Hansen, who leads the National Young Farmers Coalition's federal policy work. So he's focusing on improving young farmers' access to capital, credit, and land, and helps young farmers to understand the resources available at the USDA, which is got to be a full-time job in and of itself. So I just want to start off the discussion with, the title of the program is about family farms, and the question is, well, what is a family farm, right? I mean, I actually recently had this situation where I was trying to write about something, and I thought, well, what is it? And I think Paul Willis is in the audience here. I emailed Paul Willis and I said, what do you think a family farm is? And then I called up Nicolette Nyman and I said, what do you think a family farm is? And it was really interesting because, it obviously had to do with ownership, but it had to do with the connection to the land and the farm and the animals. And one of the things I thought was really interesting was that there was a definition that the Animal Welfare Institute had put together that had to do with living on the farm. And Nicolette Nyman, who I assume, I'm sorry, I should have said who it is, Bill Nyman and Nicolette have a B&N ranch out in Northern California. And she said their requirement is that you live on the farm. And she said, and by that definition, we wouldn't be family farmers, which of course, I mean, you'd be crazy not to think they're family farmers. So, I think that sort of coming to understand what we're talking about and how we should define it is really important for having the conversation to be productive. So just to start and give everyone a chance to talk, we're going to do a lightning round with everyone on the panel for your definition of a family farm, what you think it should mean. Go ahead.
I'm first.
You're first.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. I really do appreciate being invited here today. And we, at the Rodale Institute, we have a definition for what we feel a family farm is, and we don't worry about size necessarily. There are small family farms, there are medium-sized, there are very large family farms, and we work with them all. Our definition of, I think, a better way to describe, according to the Rodale Institute, would be what is a farmer? And right now we have two growing systems that are in place. They're both reflective of two very well-known and very well-respected sciences. One is called chemistry, and that's the one that currently dominates our food system. And one is called biology, also well-known and respected. And we think that you're a farmer when you farm with the science called biology. It's about life. And what we're most well known for is comparing. We have a long-term 34-year study, our farming systems trial. We're in our 34th year. We have conventional right next to organic. So let me describe to you a conventional farmer right next to a organic farmer. J.I. Rodale's words: healthy soil, healthy food, healthy people. That's our organic farmer. Talking about the soil, knowing about the soil, organic matter, the life, and making the soil better today than it was yesterday, every day. That's a farmer on the organic side, and those are the farmers that we think we want to support, and this group should support. Now let's take the same comparison on this side, the conventionals.
I gotta let everybody have their turn, so quickly wrap this up. Okay.
I'm wrapping up.
Okay.
What about this? Unhealthy soil, unhealthy plants, unhealthy people. And that's what's occurring.
Sorry.
It's okay.
I work with small and medium-sized farmers who come to the DC metro area to sell at our farmers markets. And what I believe a family farm is someone who is intimately connected with the farm. They know the soils, they know the plants they're going to plant this season, they know the animal health. They are such smart people, and they are intimately connected. They don't have to go to the computer and stay all day to figure out what they're going to do to go farming, but they are intimately connected to the farm, whether they live on it or live next to it or are leasing an acre of orchard farm that they're going to be planting on. They know everything about that farm. The only thing they can't really control is the weather, but they're really intimately connected to every part of the farm, and they're also their own economic engine, because by doing their farming and expanding their operations, usually they're employing people in their immediate area. Those are going to be sort of the next farmers that will come out of it, because they're learning that farming skill from those farmers who are so committed to it and then committed to bringing food to cities or to their communities. So it's that intimate connection with the land and the environment, so important.
So in contrast to my colleague from the Rodale Institute, for the organization for which I work, the International Fund for Agricultural Development, size does matter. And for us, our focus is small. We focus on smallholder farmers. The technical definition for them is a plot of land of under 2 hectares or under 5 acres. And just to put into perspective the size of the group we're talking about globally, there are some 500 million small farms around the world. And a very conservative estimate would be that there are about 5 persons working on each of those farms, often family members. So most of these are family farms, smallholder family farms. So if you do the math, you quickly come up to about 2.5 billion people, or 1/3 of humanity. So that's our focus. And then more broadly speaking, when people refer to family farms, that's a bit different than what we're talking about at EFAD and what we focus on. I think too often these terms are used interchangeably, and there is a distinction, because a lot of times when people talk about family farms, that also includes big corporate farms or mid-sized farms. But again, from our perspective, we focus on smallholder family farms.
So my name is Chandler Gould. I work for the National Farmers Union. I would hope I'd be able to give a definition of a family farm, because we represent 200,000 family farmers and ranchers across the country. We also don't limit the size of a farm in our definition of a family farm. It's the entity and who owns it. Is it a husband and a wife? Is it a husband and, or a dad and a son? Is it an extended family? I've got a member in Providence, Rhode Island. She farms on about a half an acre of a vacant lot that she dug out herself and is selling high-end organic vegetables and herbs into the restaurants there in Providence, Rhode Island. I've got members that have 5,000 acres of canola in North Dakota. I've got members that have got 30 dairy cows in Vermont, and members that have 10,000 dairy cows in California, but yet they're all owned by a family entity. And one of the things I think needs to be changed in this dialogue, and going back to our former speaker, when we say corporate, farming is a very dangerous, it is the 3rd most dangerous occupation that you can have in the United States. So a lot of these farms are having to become LLCs just to protect themselves. So we really at the Farmers Union have moved away from saying we don't like corporate farming. What we don't like is industrialized farming, because many of our farmers have to be incorporated, but it is not related to their size.
Yeah, so you can see how we've got a lot of similar but slightly different definitions. So luckily we have Kathy, whose organization is called the National Family Farm Coalition, so you know that they have thought about this.
So
Kathy, enlighten us.
Pleased to be here, and I've been representing here in DC the Family Farm Coalition since the late 1980s, and I think all of us here are people who've been working on these issues. We're not ourselves the farmers, and I think there are, of course, a lot of different definitions, but when I first started working at the coalition, I was sitting in a Senate Ag Committee room, and someone turned around and said to me, well, how do you define a family farmer? And so that's been an issue throughout the work that I think all of us do. And sometimes people ask it as a distraction, and I feel like what the real issue is the issue of who controls, who makes decisions. Is there an ability for that farm family, and I think the different types of operations reflect some of these different decisions. Sometimes it's a co-op, but usually we're talking about an individual family in control of the decisions and being able to really, in a ideal situation and part of our vision is recoup what they should be earning as that farm family for the work that they're doing. And so we tend to use the term small to mid-size, we use independent, we use diversified, really to reflect the nature of the operation. And I think that kind of cuts across some of the different conversations here.
Okay, Eric.
Yeah, so a lot of our panelists so far have kind of talked about the upper end of what a family farm could be. So where does the line between family farm versus industrialized corporation, what have you? Because we represent young farmers and people just getting started, I'm very concerned about what does that bottom end look like. So what is a hobby farm? What is somebody who retired onto some land and has some cattle now versus a family farm look like? And there's not anything wrong with that bottom of the spectrum, but that's a very different group of people than those who are looking to make a career out of farming. So for us, we would like to see families be able to support themselves off of their farm operation. Off-farm income is great. It should be an option, not a requirement. And for a lot of the farms in this country, it is a requirement, not an option.
But so, okay, so I don't want to spend the whole panel talking about this, but just to follow up just quickly maybe with Kathy here. So is family farm the wrong term? Is it a problematic term? I mean, is independent better? Is, I mean, sustainable, there's a complicated word too. I mean, you've kept your name, but what is the word that you like using to represent kind of what I think we're hearing as a theme here that isn't necessarily sound like family farm to your average Joe?
Well, certainly it's a term that has worked and it resonates well with a lot of different people. I think being clear what that family farm should not only look like, how engaged it is in the community, how vibrant it is, what it takes to really sustain that family farm operation is really important. If people are operating under contract relationships with major companies or entities, are those fair? Are they able to really make decisions and not be subject to really unfair conditions? So, I mean, I feel like, you know, it is the term that's out there, and we want to be clear that people have a vision of what it should be looking like into the future to be sustainable. And also, I would say that this issue, when we work internationally, we do deal with this kind of tension between smallholder versus family farm versus small farm. And so I don't think we're going to solve that problem here today, but being really acknowledging that there are many of the same kinds of situations in other communities around the world as well.
I mean, I think it's just a worthy thing because it's very hard to get people to agree on them when everybody's talking about somebody different. And so, you know, whatever this is, this independent, connected to the land farm that is, you know, economically sustainable, you know, having these farms does help to build that resilience that Brian was talking about when we started. And I know that all of you probably have great stories, and this is a very educated audience who probably knows a lot about the benefits of it. But there were a couple of people I wanted to sort of see if you could talk a little bit about. I just wanted to start with Eric again. You were talking a little bit about, you know, the importance of keeping farmers in small towns, and which builds a community there so that people actually want to stay there. And then there can be more farmers, because of course the big problem we have is that there aren't, and you know, the farmers are aging and there aren't enough farmers. So can you talk a little bit about like the farm and creating the resilience in rural America?
Yeah. So I grew up in a small town. When I finished college, everybody asked me, "Oh, are you moving home?" I was like, "No, no. Where would I work?" And that's a real problem. And we see family farmers and farm families who are telling their kids, leave the farm, go off to college and don't come back, because there's not a future here. You can't make a living doing this anymore, and why would you want to be here? So as a result, and because of consolidation as well, we're seeing fewer and fewer people on the landscape. And a community, you can have a community of 5 people, but if you have a community of 10 people, it's a lot more desirable of a place to live, more people to sit around and look at. So I think it's critical that we have a lot of people out on the land, and that's part of the reason why we like to think about smaller, medium-sized farms, farms that are large enough to support the farmer, but also that there's enough of them that it's building resilience. If something happens to one, your system doesn't fall apart, but also that it creates these communities and you're bringing people back. We have a lot of young people coming back to rural America now. A lot of them didn't grow up there. A lot of them went to college and are bringing degrees back. And there's a lot of benefits from having people coming back into your community with new ideas and also with expertise that they can either use on the farm with experimenting with new growing practices, or that they can use off the farm with jobs that require education.
Right. Chandler, you wanted to add something to that?
I did. So the National Farmers Union, this is a problem of beginning farmers or getting new people into agriculture. And I grew up on a family ranch in Texas in a town of 125 people and did the same, went off to college and then moved to Washington. But I think we also need to broaden this conversation. Just because I'm still not myself personally in our beef ranch operation, I'm still very much involved in agriculture. I work in agriculture policy. There's a lot of good federal policy and programs out there, like the Renewable Fuel Standard, where we've got young people from family farms going to college and getting degrees in chemical engineering, coming back, working at these renewable fuels plants, where we are decreasing our dependency on foreign oil. These are high-tech paying jobs. They bring people and money and education back to rural America. But we also need to look at the major barriers of land and the cost, which have already been alluded to, whether it's a beginning farmer tax credit, or if myself as a retiring farmer, if I'm willing to sell to a beginning farmer, could I get a reduction on my capital gains tax? I mean, we need to do something to help the financial barriers that many of our younger producers, and I think the last census said the average farmer is 58 years old. It was 56 during the last census, so it is a continued problem. But I think this is a broader conversation than just saying, am I still going to sit on a tractor? Am I still going to go push cows?
Tom, you wanted to add something, then I'm going to come to Coach. I want to ask you.
No, if I may just broaden it a bit further, I'm constantly struck by the commonalities when talk about, say, the U.S. context versus the international or global context. I mean, both of you could have been speaking for my organization, similar issues. Internationally, 85% of the world's young people, ages 14 to 19, are in developing countries. And the issue of giving them incentives not to leave rural areas, not to leave the farms, and generating more poverty in urban areas is huge. But I think that speaks to both the challenge we face in addressing global poverty, et cetera, but also the opportunity that's there to create some hope for people to stay in rural areas, but also for those in cities and urban areas to either go back to rural areas or just to go in general because there's opportunity.
Right. I mean, the way I wanted to ask Coach about, which is a little bit different than the economics, is more about the resilience of the soil and the environment. That you can be big and create resilience, but what you're talking, talk to me a little bit about how the resilience that we're looking for, the resilience as metric, this family farm, whatever this is, helps to bring that.
Well, we feel like the farming community as a whole is in decline. It's aging, as you're hearing from the panel. And so what we think part of the answer, there's not enough organic farmers for sure. The demand totally outstrips supply. And what we're seeing is farmers that are doing what they think is the right thing. They educate their children. They use the farm to send them off to college. And most of them don't come back, as you're hearing. And so what happens to that farm? A developer comes in and writes a check with more zeros than they've ever seen before. And that farm then comes out of farming and goes into development. So what we've done is created some farmer training programs. We have 3 in place now. Some urban training programs. Certainly we're working on training farmers for the rural community. But we also are working with veterans.
Right.
And our veterans program is meant to give the veterans an opportunity to experience farming at a novice level, and then our goal is to place them on farms where the farmer is aging, is having trouble getting on the tractor on a day-to-day basis, but they don't want to give their land up to development. And so we're telling them that we can help you by literally bringing in the Marines.
I'd like to tell about my Marine, because we have a Marine that joined our market about 4 years ago. He's a 2-term Iraqi vet. His dad was a Marine. His dad's actually a really wonderful carpenter, so he makes these beautiful boxes to bring the product to market. He wanted to farm when he got out of the military. He lives in Augusta County, West Virginia, and so he's farming just down from his pappy's farm. And he is farming conventionally. Now, he does a little IPM on there and everything. I saw him at our farmers meeting this week, and he said to me, "Bernie, I'm going to need you." I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because I'm going to farm 25 acres. I've just bought a farm, a small farm, 25 acres. It's all organic. And I want to start doing that because I see that as a way to boost my sales in addition to what I'm doing on my farm now." He also bought a processing plant in West Virginia because why? We have this extra product on the farm that goes to waste. So he's making pickles, or he's making a chili sauce or mustard, and he's also doing that for other farmers in that county area. He's a little economic engine. He needs us, yes, because his products are being sold in farmers markets all across our area. And he's terrific. That's what we're seeing that young person come back into farming, because they see this economic opportunity and also that organic and sustainable, it can exist together. We want it to.
I think that part of creating the resilience, that was something I get on a soapbox a lot, so I guess I'll just get on it again. But the, is about the connecting. There's a lot of new farmers, and then there are old farmers, and old farmers are, bad, and they will want to spray chemicals everywhere. And new farmers, they're so cute, and they have tattoos, and they drink microbrews, and it's great. And the important thing in terms of creating resilience in in the generation of farmers is connecting those people who really have open ideas and an MBA and love this stuff, but don't really know as much about the land as It's interesting for me, once I could spend some time in West Virginia. It was just made me think of it. I had this guy, and he grew up farming, and he had learned all kinds of things that would make you cry, and but that's the way So what you want is to get someone who knows that land and someone who's open to new ideas, and put them together and take advantage of those two things. I think that's a kind of resilience that doesn't get talked about a lot. Kathy, you wanted to say something?
Well, I just think it's partially an old and new, but it's also, there's a lot of farmers who've been doing all the right things. They've been making those connections, but if they don't have the stability of a fair pricing system and an ability to get paid for what they should be getting paid for the work that they do, and I think, the comment about needing to, or having the option of an off-farm job, but that on-farm income being sort of your main source of support is absolutely essential to be caring for the land, to be caring for one's own farming practices, caring for one's own family. And so I think one of the things that we're seeing, which is really troubling, is there's significant number of farmers who have built some of these different systems, but then when there's still volatility in pricing and inability to really have that control, whether it's through the cooperative process, whether it's through having federal policy that helps establish a minimum or a fair price, people are very vulnerable. And it's not just the family themselves, but it's all of their relatives, it's other people within the community, and it's also the signal that it gives to the next generation of farmers that they don't want to be in that same situation. And so I think one of the things we've been struggling with these last couple of years is how do we make sure that the systems we have in place, whether it's crop insurance, which we personally don't think is the best approach. It should be fair pricing for what you're raising and getting in return from the buyers of your commodities. But when there is a disaster, does it in fact cover the very farmers we're talking about? And what are some of the things that need to be in place to value those products that are coming to market when you're in fact providing the labor in addition to the product? And so a lot of those issues we think are part of the conversation of what really needs to be in place for there to be a truly resilient rural and farm economy.
So I really want to pick up on that, but I know, Chandler, you wanted to say one more thing quick, and
Very
then I'm going to
quick.
pick up on this.
First thing, I want to associate all my comments with what Kathy just said, because NFU and Family Farm Coalition work on competition and concentration issues all the time, so no need to repeat that. Hopefully, secondly, all of you value your handheld devices enough so you won't throw them at me. I am going to be the one that says we have to have conventional farmers. We have got to have large farmers. We've got to have small farmers. We have to have farmers that use biotechnology. You can have healthy soils, healthy farms, and healthy people through conventional production. I will also say, though, in the National Farmers Union, our fastest growing membership are organic producers. That's where we're seeing a lot more women come in. We're seeing a fast-growing area in our membership in the New England area. But I think what we forget is I've heard Manhattan and Los Angeles and Chicago talked about up here, and urban farming is very important to bring the consumer back to their food supply, to understand what's actually going on in middle America. But you have to remember, in small towns like Stephenville, Texas, where I'm from, we still eat the same food that you're talking about here. And so, and I'm not gonna go to the grocery store and buy food that's unhealthy for my family or for myself. So when we talk about this big, broad, organic, conventional, and biotech, agriculture is big enough. There are enough people out there that need to be fed that there's room for all types of production systems.
Okay, I really want to get back to Kathy's, but I don't think he's going to throw his smartphone at you, but he definitely wants to answer. So answer, and then I'm going to get back to Kathy's
Yes,
point.
and I gave my smartphone to one of my friends.
And I must say, I'm not cute. I don't have tattoos.
We're going to check that
I'm
later.
very interested. I'm very, very concerned about a growing system that dominates our food system, that puts toxins and poisons on our food. It just doesn't make any sense. And so, at some point in time, we need to come to grips with the fact that it's wrong and it's a mistake. That's all. And just move on. Get away from it and move to growing again with nature. Before the word organic agriculture ever occurred, that's how we did it. Now, our study proves, after 34 years, that yields are the same. Organic right next to conventional. So when they say we can't feed the world, if it's based on yields, neither can they. And if it's based on yields, we can too, but we grow health in the soil.
There's
Now,
also been
let me
studies-
wait. I have one more study.
Okay, and then I'm going to have to, because we're going to run out of time, you guys.
This will be quick.
Okay.
Nancy Swanson and Andre Liu did a study, and this is recent. This was in the last couple of weeks. They wanted to do a correlation study on the usage of glyphosate, and they picked 22 diseases. They said, let's just see if there's a correlation. And all 22 diseases had a correlation. We're talking hypertension, stroke, obesity. Here are the two that get me the worst. Alzheimer's and autism. We've connected grandpa and grandchild, generations, correlated to the use of chemical agriculture.
Okay, but hold on a second. Okay, I don't want, correlated is not the same as causation. Those Nancy Swanson studies are you'd have to like have the impact. If you look at the bars, it's like autism went up the minute that they put the chemical in the soil. There would have to be a lag. I mean, those are correlations.
It needs more study.
Yeah. Okay. But so okay, I'm just gonna move on briefly to say.
We'll fight later.
Yeah.
We'll
You'll find out if he has the tattoos. It'll be.
well, I
it'll
do
be
have
great.
a tattoo, but I gotta tell you where it's at.
But I do think that this. I don't think I've ever been on a panel where I got to go there. But I do think actually it's a good pivot because, one of the things. Okay, now I just make sure I didn't lose my train of thought. You're talking about stability and vulnerability. I mean, I think that the thing is that the resilience in the soil and protecting the earth, it really, it's. I can sit here and listen to you and say, well, of course I agree with that, 100%. I've also spent a lot of time out in, outside of the coasts and, met farmers who, yes, have to have the farm job. They are teaching school and they're only working in the summer. And I remember this farmer saying to me, the one who I was telling you about, he's like, I said, you wouldn't grow, GM sweet corn to eat, would you? And he said, you know what I love? I love to look out into a field of corn and not see one weed. And, from his perspective, the amount of money he's making, the amount he's getting for selling that corn, the amount of time that he has, those are sort of rational choices that he's making. So I think it brings us back to what Kathy was saying about, how do you create that stability? How do you give people enough money to do the farming the way we want them to do it? Because in a lot of cases, they can't afford for their family. So I wanted to talk a little bit about policies, what policies you see that that are a possibility in this. We have a new Congress, Republican Congress. Like, what is a distinct possibility? You talked, Bernie, you had mentioned that in Delaware there was a good program. Tell us what that is.
It's like a Farm Link program. So for young farmers going into agriculture who may have grown up on a farm, don't want to leave it, they really want to be in agriculture, there's a 30-year interest-free loan that farmers can get to buy land. I mean, access to land, being able to afford the land is a very hard thing for most of the farmers. If they don't inherit it or somehow are able to lease it, it's very difficult to find that. There are also Farm Link programs that will link an elderly farmer with someone who wants to go into farming. I mean, a lot of states have those kinds of programs. It's not really so much at the federal level, but it's figuring out what the different states have come up with that makes sense for their different agriculture. It's also, we have some great organizations, the Maine Organic Growers, we've got Pennsylvania Association of Sustainable Ag, CASA Future Harvest just had a conference. You should see the young people that are coming to these conferences now, Amish and Mennonite, because they all want to learn. They want to learn from the experts that are in their region and then go out and do it on the farm. It's really important. I think the other thing is that we can't just have all organic. If we started an organic farmers market in 1997 in DuPont Circle, we wouldn't have had that many farmers. So what we want is, though, for them collaborating. I see the conventional guy talking to the organic guy, and they're saying, how can you grow this way? And they're trying those kinds of practices on their farms because they're seeing it not as in competition, but a way that they can learn from each other to change. And so we have to have the easing out. Many of them are doing integrated pest management practices that are really good for the soil, good for their crops. So the farmers live on the land. They don't want to eat the chemicals either. It's expensive to put those on the land. They are worried about their health as well as the health of their customers and the health of their farm.
Okay, Eric, I just want to give Eric a chance to hear a policy that you think is a good one that's coming down or to help us build this resilience.
Yeah, so one of the biggest challenges that people have alluded to already is access to land. Especially if you don't come from a family farm, it's incredibly difficult to buy land. It's not just trying to find other farmers who are competing against other farmers that are looking to buy land. It's also competing against outside developers. One of the things we see, my organization's based in the Hudson Valley. It's not even just strip malls. It's people moving up from the city who want to retire on a tract of grass. Maybe a horse, which is fine, but that's not producing any food, and that's taking land out of production. And we're losing some of our prime soils to this kind of outside development. There's some policy in place already, looking at how conservation easements, farmland easements, can be used to take the development rights away from farmland. That doesn't quite go far enough. One of the tools we've been looking at is how you can put assurances within that farmland easement that it stays with a working farmer. So as imagine yourself as an aging farmer and you want to see your land stay in farming and you put this farmland easement on it, and then you go to sell the land and you pass it on to another farmer and then they sell the land and all of a sudden it's no longer a farm, it's this estate that a giant house has been built on with a pool. No farmer's gonna be able to afford that again. So you can add extra assurance to that. And make sure that the land trust who holds the easement has the option to purchase the land at the agricultural value again. It keeps farmers on the land working the land.
Kathy, I know you want to answer. We're going to run out of time here soon, but you probably have a million things. But I wonder if you could answer, but see if there's incentives or programs for mid-sized farmers in particular, because that really is the people we've lost, and those are the size farms that can support a family and that can have enough power. So is there anything out there being done to incentivize people, not incentivize, but bring back the mid-sized farms?
Well, from our perspective, certainly this last farm bill did not move forward on that area at all. I mean, there's sort of a shift away from what would have been, even though there have been shortcomings of it, of a pricing or a subsidy system, into much more of a crop insurance, kind of margin insurance system, which both for grain and commodity and for dairy farmers raises a whole lot of questions.
Can you just really briefly, if that's even possible, explain to people what crop insurance does, just so in case they don't?
Well, maybe I'll let Chandler
sell it.
Well, maybe I'll let Chandler do that.
Because I know what you mean, there's been this shift, but I don't know.
But let me just say one thing, and then I'll pass on to Chandler on the crop insurance question. But in addition to the land access question of who else is buying the land in terms of, the mansions and very small farms that may not be in the production system. We also are really concerned about where land is being used as part of speculation and investments. And we've heard of the term land grabs, often referred to in other countries and around the world, but in fact, we're seeing an increasing amount of that happening here in the United States, including with some of the pension and investment funds that many people we all know, if they in fact are lucky enough to have a pension or an investment, may have some of their money in. And so this question of who's buying land and for what purposes and for what kind of terms of time raises, in my mind, a serious challenge to a resilient economy, because those decisions are definitely not going to be being made on that individual farm, but in a corporate or in a boardroom. So I'll pass on the crop insurance question.
Okay,
to
so
Chandler.
just explain to people what it is and how the focus has shifted there. And then we're going to move on to one last question, then we're going to open it up to the audience.
Sure. So crop insurance, I'm not going to lie, is controversial. Most of you sitting in this audience, including myself, either get paid every 2 weeks or once a month by someone else, or you're self-employed, but probably not directly into agriculture. And the only entity that is large enough to underwrite crop insurance programs is the U.S. government, because the way you make insurance actuarially sound is, the chances of me having a car wreck now and Progressive coming in and paying, and everyone in this room having a car wreck on the same day and Progressive having to come pay is very different. But when a winter storm or direct winds or drought comes in and knocks out 5 states, and remembering that you only get paid one time a year, that's when you harvest or when you take your livestock to the sale, you can purchase crop insurance, whether it's for yield loss. There's different products out there for revenue coverage. We also now have things out there for specialty crop growers, for fruits and vegetables, and for livestock producers. I will say, because it'll come up in questioning, the government underwrites 60% of the premium for crop insurance because it is, again, the only entity large enough to do it. That's where we have a lot of back and forth of whether or not that's fair or not, because nobody helps you.
Who's getting the subsidies? It's who is getting the subsidies from the government.
If my premium was going to be $15,000 for my farm, the government would come in and underwrite. They would pay 60% of that premium in order for me to get the coverage to insure my crop or my revenue. And that's where we get a lot of pushback from media.
Okay.
Do you insure organic farmers?
Yes, we do.
Good.
And we also work with the Farmer Veteran Coalition, so we have more in common than you think.
Yes, we do. Okay, we won't fight.
Also insure against loss of price. You bet on your product going to market for a certain amount, and that price drops, and then you get, so it's almost kind of like gambling, stock market gambling on something, and the government's going to underwrite that. I don't know if that's such a good thing.
Well, I would just say that even if one has a loss as an individual farm family, they're not recouping all of their losses. I mean, there's a lot of other issues that go into play.
There are caps on it, and there has also been pushes, which NFU has supported unsuccessfully in the Farm Bill, to put payment limits on crop insurance so that we're not paying out millions and millions to the top 2% largest farms, but we're having trouble getting enough political clout to get that in the Farm Bill.
All right, we really are at Q&A time, but I'm still going to ask one more question. I'm only going to let Kathy answer it. And that is because, when I think about Midsize Farms, you talk about what's happened. I mean, is the Midsize Farm really dead, and that the new Midsize Farm is a co-op or a what is the word I'm looking for? Like buying groups, having that resilience is having small farmers who are networked together to get the scale without the negative aspects of scale. I mean, is that?
Well,
I think that's one of the options that.
That's an interesting question, but certainly, when the mid-sized farmer that we're talking about is raising the product on their farm, they're selling it through a variety of different channels. I think what you're really asking is there a different system that should be the intermediary that's doing the purchasing of that product, or there's some other kind of cooperative sales, so it's not just going from, the field to the elevator to Cargill or ConAgra or whomever for exports. So, I mean, to us, there are other issues that we need to bring back more of that value into the domestic selling at some different levels. But at the heart of it is farmers themselves, for what they're producing, get it paid a price that reflects their cost of production.
Right.
And that needs to be at the base, and from that, one builds a much fairer and better food system. I would also just say that we also work with fishers and with people who own boats. They're up against the same kind of consolidation and concentration and government policy playing a role in it. And so we're the first to say this is not something that can be solved by an individual change. It needs a policy and a systemic change to shift who has the most control over what's being raised, both in this country and globally.
Okay, well, we could talk all day, but I want to open it up to questions. Are you somebody running around with a microphone, or?
It's really hard to
Okay, so we've got someone right here. Oh, and I should say, I questions, not comments, not soapboxes, not speeches. I will cut you off.
Thank you, Jane. I'm Mary Kimball, Center for Land-Based Learning, Northern California. One of the things that I didn't hear in anybody's conversations today was the issue of succession planning. To me, it's one of the biggest threats to family farmers and resilience, because sometimes our own families are our biggest threats versus development and so on. How to split that farm to the next generation. And so I'm wondering if those of you are working on any of that or have policies that you could speak to that you see to the future.
Actually, at our annual convention for the National Farmers Union, this is a very big issue. We're holding a breakout session every year for the next 3 years to talk about how does your will need to be set up, how do you definitely need to explain if maybe one child or whoever you're passing your farm is going on to, maybe the other two don't want to be involved in it. That needs to all be written out, and we have educational sessions on that because of the baby boomers are moving out of the farming industry, and how do we transfer that land wealth? It's a big problem.
And I would say that it's also an opportunity where there are people who have left the farm, who are in communities where they care about their food, to be thinking back about what are some of the decisions being made, both in terms of the succession of that farm, but other future uses. And I think you referred to the issue of easements that we want to make sure stay in farming. There's also the question of, are there other shifts or decisions being made about how that land will be used? And that's where we see this pension and investment issue also being an opportunity for people who care about how that land's being used to start raising questions with us about what kind of funds are being invested that could be then with very little control over those resources.
I think education and awareness is really important in that, because I've written about that, and when it comes down to it, the problem is that nobody wants to talk about dying. It's awkward and weird, and and people are, there are issues within families. So it's sort of making it something within farming communities that people are willing to kind of have a conversation about, that everyone else is having as well. Whoops, sorry. Someone, I've got one here. Can you pass the mic down? Here you go. Maybe not. There we go. All right, we got her.
Hi, Sam Sundias. I'm a grad student at the NYU Food Studies program. I see one of the threats that's facing farmers is their ability to organize, and I'm wondering if you have ideas or feelings as to how to organize the very different risks that are facing nonprofit farms and private farms and public farmers.
Go ahead.
So supporting farmers' organizations is at the heart of what my organization has always done. We see that really as the only option, given the small size of the farmers we deal with. On their own, a lot of times they can't access markets, or if they can, it's not on favorable terms. And so by organizing farmers into farmers' organizations or cooperatives, they can better access markets, know what a fair price is, get the fair price, and they can also achieve the kind of volume and quality that the market demands. So that's at the heart of everything we do.
On co-ops. So National Farmers Union was found on, we were the main pushers for the Capital Volstead Act that made it capable for you to put a co-op together. And that is exactly right. The more that farmers can come together, not only to collectively market their product and get a better price for it, going back to what Kathy said, if you go to nfu.org Every month we put out a thing called the Farmer's Share, and it is basic things you buy: bread, bacon, milk, and it tells you how much you pay on average in the store and how much actually goes back to the farmer. And through the co-op method of being able to market better, that is a better way to bring more people together to make sure they're getting a fair price.
But I would also say there's a really big issue of making sure that farmers themselves, or fishers if they're in part of it, are able to retain control of that cooperative, and that it doesn't just become a co-op in name and in fact be very much operating in a corporate, totally exerting or extracting as much profit from both at the farm end and at the consumer end. And so we've unfortunately seen quite a number of cooperatives, not the ones we're directly talking about, but other cooperatives that we feel are overstepping. And there's been a push over the years to tighten some of those provisions. I think given the current Congress, that's probably not where we're going to see things happen, but we are looking to make sure that some of the mergers and consolidation and other issues get the focus that they should from the Department of Justice, and where we can from the Department of Agriculture, and not just sort of ignore that issue, because if we ignore it, we have very little control over what's going to happen down the road.
So completely apart from the marketing and sales side of things, farming's really isolating. You're out in rural America on hopefully not a tiny piece of land, and you don't have a ton of neighbors, and especially if you're a young person out there, there's not a lot of young people there too. The average age of a farmer is 58.
They're party animals.
Yeah, yeah. The reason my organization exists is because farmers wanted to get together and organize. We're led by farmers. We were started by farmers. There's a real appetite for that, and I think that it's really, there's benefits that are just from getting people together to talk, have a beer, help people out, exchange information every so often.
So I just want to point out that I just love that Chandler's 3 things you would have to buy were milk, bread, and bacon, not eggs. And I have a question from the online that I want to read, but I want to pick someone to get the microphone to them because we're going to run out of time. So did someone else have another question right up here in the front? So just quickly, it was actually a question about intergenerational farming as well. But in particular, they wanted to know whether there were tax reform things that we should focus on in terms of making that intergeneration, that transfer easier. Is there anything in particular on that front?
Again, like I said, in NFU, we are really working on trying to do something for if you sell your land to a beginning farmer, that you get some type of tax credit, don't have to pay as much in capital gains tax for the profit you make on that land. We keep hearing that this new Senate and House tax reform is going to be a big part of their discussion, but going back to talking about farmers wanting to organize, you have to remember there's only 46 members on the House Agriculture Committee, and when you look at trying to get a bill passed that's for a very specific, and we're very supportive of a small group of people, that's very difficult. So the more voices that we can have from the consumers saying we've got to have beginning and young farmers out there will help us get those tax credits in place.
Okay, we have a last question here.
Yeah, hi, I'm Joy Thaler from Cocoa Compassion, and Kathy, I think it's for you. The consumer is confused, and when they look at buying fair trade, I think that there's a huge issue that they think a lot of the money goes back to the small landholder farmer. And the small landholder farmer 20 degrees north and south of the equator where cacao grows, they can't afford certification. So I'm just wondering, how are we addressing the confusion of the consumer, and how are we helping small landholder farmers have proper labeling to say it is organic, because that's how they farm?
Well, that's a good question. I think actually the confusion is at a much bigger level than the organic issue or not. We're dealing with issues where many of us, certainly Farmers Union and us and other groups, fought really hard for country of origin labeling. It's now from the trade arena. It's also being pushed by industry that really wants to make sure that people don't even know what country their products are from, let alone sort of the how and by whom are certain products produced. There's member groups of ours that are part of the Domestic Fair Trade Association, and they've been working really hard at making sure that we're dealing with issues that look at both the practices and the labor standards. And I know there's a panel tomorrow that's going to look at some of those issues and some of the worker issues. So I think the issue of how do we make sure that, in my mind, this doesn't seem nearly as confusing as others make it out to be, because we're talking about sort of fairness in the system at each level. And we would say it needs to start at the farmer or the fisher and then work through the whole system. And labeling is a piece of the issue. I mean, that's kind of, it's important because that's what people see at the grocery store. That's what people see when they're purchasing. But something like on GE labeling, on genetic engineering, we think it's much more important that farmers have the option to choose what kind of seeds they want, and for there to be the kind of testing and approval or lack of approval or rejection like we had with genetically engineered wheat. We don't have GE wheat because people fought back against Monsanto's efforts, both in the US and Canada. And we hope, if we have to fight that fight in this next year, that we have many more people working with us to say there's no way we want that product out there. And so there's a lot of different issues, and you're right, there is a confusion factor, but we would say that unfortunately, there's major industries trying to make it more confusing right now, and holding on to something as important as country of origin labeling is just one small step, but a really important one.
Tom, you wanted to add
I
something?
could just dovetail on that. From a global perspective for EFED, farmers organizations or cooperatives have a huge role to play in this regard, especially in helping to defray costs for small, often poor farmers. So that's one approach that we take, but another is in playing a brokering role in negotiating or facilitating mutually beneficial partnerships or transactions between smallholder farmers in developing countries and private sector actors, whether it's Starbucks or Mars, and trying to negotiate terms by which those companies would actually help to pay for much of that.
So I have 52 seconds left, and I'm going to just end with one question I have, and it's actually for Coach. So in terms of programs, you know, I can't take credit for this. I heard Michael Pollan talking about it, about incentives for, you know, farmers to keep the soil healthy. And I was like, wow, that's brilliant. So good idea. Any traction?
Good idea. There is traction, and we have a plan. 2015 has been identified as by the United Nations as the year of soil. And our plan is to dovetail with that effort, and we're doing a couple of things. Number one, we would like to see a microscope on every farm. Let people actually see the life in the soil. They have that aha moment every time they see it. I'm looking at the clock.
I know, it's flashing 000 at us. Okay. We could talk forever. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you to the panelists. Appreciate it.